Supply and demand alignment. So welcome to the lesson 6, which is the final lesson of the first module of CSCP course. In our previous lesson, we covered forecasting, turning historical demand into a number. In this lesson, it is about what happens next, aligning the forecasted demand with what supply can actually deliver. This is section E of the CSCP syllabus, and it introduces the sales and operations planning process, commonly called S&OP, which is one of the most heavily tested topics on the exam. So by the end of this lesson, you'll understand the full operations planning hierarchy, how S&OP reconciles demand and supply, the three operations strategies, the three supply demand strategies, and how companies measure customer service levels. So here's the roadmap for this lesson. So what we'll cover is the operations planning and control hierarchy, basically how strategy cascades down to daily execution. We already saw the high level view of this one. We'll also talk about strategic, business, master, and resource planning. So these are the long-term planning layers, by the way. Strategic plan, business plan, master plan, and of course, resource planning. The monthly S&OP process, sales and operations process. 5 steps that reconcile demand, supply, and finance, right? So the 3 elements should agree on a common ground, basically, to understand what the demand is for the suppliers, to reconcile both demand and supply. And of course, finance will definitely come into the picture. And then we'll also learn about operations and supply demand strategies, level, chase, hybrid, and also we'll learn about MTS, MTO, ATO, right? So made to order, assembled to order. So that's what it means. So we'll see in detail. Managing demand and customer service levels. So we'll also look into prioritization situations and also the service metrics. Operations planning and control. Demand side activities and supply side capacity planning converge into priority planning. So this diagram that you see is the backbone of the whole CSCP body of knowledge. You'll see that it is referenced in multiple modules. On the left are the demand side activities. Forecasting feeds the demand management, which in turn feeds the distribution requirements planning, DRP. In the middle is priority planning, the sequence of strategic planning, then sales and operations planning, which produces the production plan. Then master scheduling, which produces the master production schedule. Then materials requirements planning. On the right hand side is capacity planning, the supply side mirror basically. So here we have the resource planning, RCCP, which is the rough cut capacity planning, and the CRP, which is the capacity requirements planning. So each one checks whether the matching priority plan is actually achievable, right? So one tip for your exam is that, priority answers like what and how much do we need. Capacity answers are, do we have the resources to do it, right? So we should know what the priority answers, what and how much we need, right? And the capacity answers will be, do we have enough resources to actually do it? Strategic and business planning. The strategic plan is the highest level. It's the company's mission and the big goals like market share and profit growth. The business plan translates that strategy into something more concrete, more tangible, like a 1 to 3 year plan in dollars, organized by the product family, right? Built from the demand plan and long-term forecasts, right? That is the backbone. So this is important for the exam. The business plan is the point of reference that S&OP process checks against every month, right? So if the S&OP consistently can't hit the business plan, that's a signal that the business plan itself may need some revision, or we need to revisit the business plan, right? So the strategic plan is the highest level. It sets the mission and the resources that are needed to get there. The goal of the strategic plan is to achieve market share, increase revenue, profits, and growth. The objectives are value delivered to customers and owners, right? So if you look at it, the goals are what the company wants, and the objectives are the company deliverables specifically to the customer. That is the customer's point of view, whether we have delivered value to the customers. Now, how is it broken down further? Broken down in the sense, how is the strategic plan implemented? It is implemented through the business plan, right? So what does the business plan have? It has inputs, that is demand plan and long-term forecasts, right? The inputs to the business plan are the demand plan and the long-term forecasts, right? So what do we achieve in the next 1 to 3 years? That is the explicit vision to that the business plan brings in, right? Now, how is it expressed? How is the vision expressed in business plan? It is stated in dollars and grouped by the product family. Remember that the forecasts at a higher level, or the product family level, tends to be more realistic than individual unit level, right? So this is from our previous lessons, right? Next, the point of reference for S&OP. The business plan basically has a point of reference for S&OP. It guides tactical sales and production plans, right? So that is how the business plan comes to life with a view to achieve the goals of the strategic plan. Master planning and resource planning. So master planning is the long-term resource plan sitting just above the S&OP. It decides whether current capacity is enough or whether the company needs to invest in new capacity, right? Capacity need not mean just the human resources or employees who are working. Capacity can also mean whether we have enough equipment, enough raw material, right? Enough input to get to the required output, right? Resource planning is a mechanism for that, right? So it looks like 15 to 18 months out. 18 months is the general bare minimum. It looks at resources for that long, right? And it also looks at resources that might take a long time to acquire, like for example, new machinery, or building a new warehouse, or some kind of specialized labor that is required for production, right? Because these things have long lead times to purchase, right? And probably install and get it up and running, get producing, right? So there is a good amount of lead time that is required, right? Hence the plan should be at least spread out to 15 to 18 months, by the way. So resource planning deals with the big, slow to acquire resources, right? So capacity requirement planning, which we'll see later in this hierarchy, it deals with detailed short-term capacity at the work center level, right? Where the work actually happens. So that is the difference between the two, right? So master planning and resource planning both go hand in hand, right? The monthly sales and operations planning process. So this is the core S&OP cycle, and it is tested heavily, okay? And it consists of these 5 steps, typically consists of these 5 steps, and is repeated every month. So why is it repeated every month? Because the market might change, the inputs might change, the forecast might change. So revisiting the plans on a monthly basis gives us better control and understanding of the demand based on which we can produce the product, right? So what are the steps in the sales and operations planning? Step one is gathering the data. So basically the statistical forecast gets updated with the latest actuals, right? Step two is the demand planning phase where product, brand, marketing and sales review and adjust that forecast into a demand plan. So at the end of the demand planning phase, what do we have? We have the demand plan. What goes into the demand plan? The forecast. And who is it reviewed by? By all product, brand, marketing, sales, everybody, right? The third step is the supply planning phase, where the supply side checks whether it can actually deliver that demand, right? That is there in the demand plan. And if it cannot, the supply side will propose changes if they cannot, deliver. Or they say if the supply side cannot, meet the numbers of the demand plan, okay, they will propose a counter, right? So they will try and come to a common ground where a reasonable, demand and supply plan. This is where the reconciliation takes place, right? This is where the middle ground is found between demand and supply. What are we trying to do here? We are trying to align both demand and supply, right? So step 4 will be a pre-meeting. In this, so these are very important meetings because this whole process is heavily tested. So step 4, in the pre-meeting, the key players will prepare the data and set the agenda for the SOP. Okay, this is a meeting before the S&OP, actual S&OP meeting, right? Now in the step 5, which is the actual S&OP meeting, the executive meeting basically. The previous one was the pre-meeting, and the step 5 is the executive meeting where the VPs, including the CEO, review and approve the consensus plan, right? Consensus plan among both sides, from the supply side, from the demand side and the supply chain. So I spoke about a middle ground that they would have reached by reconciling the numbers and by reconciling what demand is there and then what supply can meet, right? So they will arrive at a common ground. So in this executive meeting, which has all the VPs and the CEO and everybody, they review this plan and they approve the consensus, right? Consensus plan. So it would be very, very useful if you can memorize this order: data gathering, demand planning, supply planning, pre-meeting, executive meeting, right? So what happens in each of these steps is very important. And when I took up the CSCP exam, I remember very clearly that there was a question about, what happens exactly in this particular phase, right? So the best way to, remember and recall this is to memorize this order, right? What goes into what, right? So this is a monthly cycle, right? And each pass refines the demand plan, tests it against the supply capability and produces a consensus plan, right? So let's focus on this because this is always tested in the exam and heavily tested in the CSCP exam, right? Reconciling demand, supply and financial plans. Now in the last slide, I spoke about achieving the middle ground and the consensus, right? Now this slide will zoom into the demand and supply planning phases in more detail, right? So how it aligns, we'll see in this particular slide. Now product review flows into demand planning here, right? And this is where we evaluate the demand levels basically. Now that will feed into supply planning, where we evaluate supply capability, flowing into financial review. Now all of that gets bundled into a pre-meeting, which is the fourth step that we saw in the previous slide. And finally, the executive meeting, right? So the financial review step is very much important. It's the key step. No matter how much a company reconciles and aligns supply and demand, finance has a very strong say in what gets done and what does not get done, right? So ultimately, it comes down to the finance, right? So it's where what finance will do is they will check that the reconciled demand and supply plan is actually affordable, right? Financially feasible, and that it actually fits into the business plan. The business plan is derived with an objective of meeting the strategic plan's goals, correct? So that's what we saw in the previous slide. So this whole sequence is what reconciling demand, supply and financial plan means on the exam, basically. So the demand plan, right? It feeds to, it is reconciled with the supply plan, and once they find that particular middle ground, the entire demand and supply plan will go to the finance, and finance will see the financial feasibility and also whether it actually aligns with the business plan that is there, and then only then it will go ahead and will complete the S&OP process and deliver or produce as per the demand. Contributions to S&OP. So what does each side contribute to S&OP, and why cooperation among all the three important sides